Welcome to Popternative, where we dive into topical discussions from the worlds of pop culture, social media, and sports. Here is your host, Peter Remoliotis, aka PD Beats.
Hello and welcome to the Popternative podcast. This is the podcast and talk show where we have digital discussions on the worlds of TV, film, pop culture, everything really, depending on the guest. We talk about it all. As always, I'm your host, Peter Remoliotis, and on social media, you know me as PD Beats. You'll recognize my guest from Kidding on Showtime. We're with Gwen Hollander. Gwen, welcome to Popternative.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Whether you act, write, sing, everyone does a lot of stuff. You're all storytellers. When did Gwen Hollander decide she wanted to be a storyteller?
I think on that level, probably when I was a little kid, because I was always the kid who was like gathering my friends to put on a play or do a performance for our parents or like make a radio show. And I didn't decide I wanted to do it professionally until I was like 13.
Okay.
But I was definitely always in that storytelling vein.
Absolutely. Now, sorry, now you're a bit blurry. I'm just going to refresh. Give me 1 second. I edit, so it's fine. Don't worry. Okay, it's good now. Sometimes sometimes it gets blurry. Do I become blurry on your end at all?
Just now you did a little bit, but it's not bad.
Okay. Yeah. All good. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No, absolutely. And now, congrats on the success with Kidding. That's awesome.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit about, the premise of the show and your character on Kidding, because it's a very unique take on that life, I find.
Yeah,
like kids'
really
TV.
Yeah, everything about the show is very unique. So the show is about Jeff Picarillo, who's played by Jim Carrey, has kind of Mr. Do you guys have Mr. Rogers?
We had Mr. Rogers, but we also had Mr. Dress Up.
Okay. So
I don't know if you ever heard of him, Ernie Coombs. He was, because I'm in Canada, so we did have, I was going to bring it up. You beat me to it. I had a whole thing on Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dress Up, but we had both. We had Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dress Up.
I'm very intrigued by Mr. Dress Up. Yeah, it's essentially that kind of show that he has on public television called Mr. Pickles' Puppet Time. And so the show kind of follows, he suffers a very great tragedy where he loses one of his sons. And so the show kind of follows like what happens as he kind of in his personal life melts down and how that translates into his public persona. So it's like his private persona is his public persona and how that all kind of comes together. And I play Cheryl, who's one of the puppeteers on the show within the show. And Cheryl plays Astronauter, who is an astronaut otter. Okay.
What it sounds like, right?
Yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. Yeah. And so I just pop up in those sequences where we take a look at the show within the show.
It's pretty crazy. I think, do you remember like how many, at one point, I think like Sesame Street was like broadcasting in like over 120 countries or something?
Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah, and that's the thing is these characters, and the show does this so beautifully, these characters become so universally known and beloved.
Yep.
That people really do feel, and I'm assuming it's this way with Mr. Dress Up, but with Mr. Rogers.
You're curious about Mr. Dress Up. We will get to Mr. Dress Up. Don't worry.
I have to know. Yeah, so just these characters that really become so important in the lives of children, and then as adults, that
Yep.
stays with kids, that stays with you for your whole life, your relationship to that character.
No, absolutely. So Mr. Dress Up it aired on CBC in Canada, and we also had Mr. Rogers, right? Like we had Mr. Rogers on PBS, but Mr. Dress Up was just cool. He was just this guy that he would just like, we'd have storytelling and we'd do arts and crafts, and he'd have his big trunk with all these costumes, and it was a good time.
I love it. I'm gonna have to look it up.
Yeah, no, it was great, and I was gonna bring that up, but I mean, talk about working with Canadian Jim Carrey. I mean, that must have been a really cool experience.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is really. I always say surreal. It's surreal because not only are you even just being in the same, like even just being in the same room with him is kind of crazy at first, because I grew up watching him and idolizing him and, you know, knowing every word to all of his films. So just being in the room with him is crazy. And then to be working with him and be like in a scene with him is insane. It's really like you take a step back and you really have that moment of like, what is my life right now? And then watching him do what he does better than anybody else in the world. I mean, when he kind of gets on like an improv riff and he just takes off on one of his Jim Carrey tangents, you're like, oh my God, it's happening and I'm watching it. It's amazing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Did you see Sonic? He played Dr. Robotnik. Did you end up getting a chance to see it?
I haven't seen it yet, but my nephews are obsessed with Sonic, and my younger nephew makes everyone call him Sonic. So my brother told him that, like, he's like, you know, Aunt Gwen worked with Dr. Robotnik, and they didn't really process that because I think they're still at that age where he thinks that is Dr. Robotnik. So why would I work with him? Because he's a bad guy. Yeah, but I do want to see it. I heard he was great in it.
No, for sure. It's like, I think like when I first got into Kidding, like the first episode, and I think your character came a little later, right? Or were you in from the beginning?
Yeah, you saw me in the first episode. I don't think we got into the stuff about I think episode 2 or 3 is when we really got into it.
But like that first episode kind of just like dives in right away. Like when he goes to like the producers and like what he wants to do. Like I don't want to spoil it, but you know what I'm talking about. And it's just like, okay, this is the show.
It's not afraid.
It is crazy. How's the quarantine been for you so far though? Have you been able to kind of like get stuff done that you haven't had a chance to? Like in the past because we have time, or? Yeah,
it's actually been, you know, it's so interesting to see how everyone's handling this. It really does kind of bring, you know, everything out. So I have actually, it's been good for me because I'm suffer from a lot of anxiety, and it's been very interesting. My anxiety has lessened during this time because there's nothing I'm supposed to be doing, which really took a lot of pressure off of me. So I've actually been more creative and productive during this month than I think I have been in years, just because I'm doing things because I want to and not because I have to. So yeah, I've made all of these Avenue quarantine videos. We've made 8 so far, and I have 1 more coming. It's been a lot of work, but I'm really proud of it. And I really feel like I would never have had the energy or the interest in doing anything like that.
And we talked, and it's true too, because we talked about it in like the preamble before we recorded, but like Avenue Q, because I asked you about that. I mean, that musical is really before its time if you think about it.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was because, you know, then my husband also was in Book of Mormon on Broadway, and I do think Avenue Q for sure paved the way for shows like Book of Mormon that just said outrageous things, like things that you were not used to, words that you were not used to hearing sung became okay because of Avenue Q. Avenue Q was so shocking at first, and now it kind of almost seems tame compared to some other stuff that we've had.
I find, okay, what I'm about to say right now, and your husband, it would be funny what your husband would say about this, but like, why is it that I like some musicals that when people break into song, and then there's some I don't like? You know what I mean? Like, is it the music, me? Like, I don't know. Like, there's some of the stuff I see, you know, like Grease, for example, right? Yeah. Love Grease, one of my favorite musicals of all time. You know what I mean? Stuff like that. You know what I mean? But then I look at other things that are on Broadway, and it's just like, or like I look at like Mamma Mia, you know what I mean? Yeah. And like, I just can't get into it as much. You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean a little bit?
Oh, I totally do. I also just think that's a matter of if you like the show or not. I think if you connect to the characters and then you're okay with it. I mean, I kind of felt the same way about Mamma Mia when I saw it. I remember being like, oh, okay. But also Mamma Mia opened, I was living in New York at the time. It opened right after 9/11. And I think that was very much a like, oh, we need this right now. This is mindless fun. But it definitely, the story doesn't really match up with the songs. In Grease, the songs come out of the story for sure. Grease, you know, so I'm sure that's what it is. And also just if you like the music or you like the story.
Well, I do love, I think, are you a fan of Grease? Like, did you like Grease growing up?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think you had. Yes, I mean, I loved the movie. I have seen the stage show a couple of times, but the movie is like part of the fabric
But
of
the
me.
music in it is good. Like there's some good tunes in that one.
Oh yeah, it's great.
So okay, so what are some? Are you really into a lot of musicals? Cause like as well, like or are you? Cause you obviously get like watch a lot and you know you do a lot of stuff. Like, are you into like have you always been into that stuff like musicals?
Yeah, that was the first stuff I ever did. I
Yeah,
got into
exactly.
that. That's what got me into it. And then that's what I studied. And that's what I lived in New York for a lot of years doing only that.
Exactly. So what
Yeah.
was the transition like then?
So
Doing that and then doing like TV. Like that must have been a really cool transition.
it's a cool transition and it's also hard. Like I still am learning about it. It's a very different, I mean, it's all acting, but it's a very different way of approaching acting. So it's a learning process that I'm still learning. Like I'm still getting used to. I'm very accustomed to having a long rehearsal process, and that doesn't usually exist in TV and film. You kind of do all your work on your own, and then you go to set and you just do it. So I'm not used to that. I'm used to like at least a month of rehearsing in a room with my castmates.
Wow. What
Yeah.
was the first musical that you kind of fell in love with?
Phantom of the Opera was the one that not only did I fall in love with, but it's the reason why I'm an actor. Like I went on a field trip with my eighth grade
Ooh.
drama class and I was like, oh my God. And that was it.
I remember they did like a film adaptation and it got like destroyed.
Yeah.
You're like, yeah, that tends to happen.
Yeah. I won't talk about it.
No, but it's just funny how well, you know what? I wonder how that movie would have been received in like the Rotten Tomatoes world, where like you have the critics that review things, but you also have
Yeah.
like the user review. I don't know if you
Yeah.
noticed that. So I
Yeah.
don't look at the critic one as much anymore. I look at like the users.
Yeah. Because that's who we are. That's just us.
But I find it really interesting. Like you'll have like a critic rating of like 93
Yeah.
and then like a user rating of 26%.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
wild.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
It is very interesting. So, you know, you worked on you're working on Kidding. I mean, it's crazy. It feels like cuz there's been what is there like there's been more than one season and I feel like I just started that like I feel like I it's just time's flying by with that one.
Yeah. 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 We've had two seasons and then we don't know quite yet if there's going to be a third or not because everything happened in the world kind of right after they released season two.
What was the coolest thing that you got to do on set with like you mentioned working with Jim Carrey and you said it was a great experience. Was there anything? I mean, how was that suit? Is it very hot?
Well, the suit is difficult. It's not so much that it's hot. There's a fan in my helmet.
That's
The
cool.
fan, yeah, the fan in my helmet though is less to keep me cool, and it's more to keep my helmet from fogging up from my breath. So the suit more than anything was it's just big, and I'm very small. So it was more a matter of like figuring out how to move in it and also how to not hurt myself because it's a lot of like weight sitting on others. So the suit was its own thing. And then I mean, I did some of the weirdest things I've ever done in my life on this show. And the showrunner said to me once, he's like, I kind of like to think that every time you come to set, you're doing something weirder than the last time you were here. So I don't want to give anything away because I don't know if you haven't watched season two yet, right? Or have you?
I'm in the middle.
No. Okay, so there's season two is where I do some of the weirdest stuff, and I don't want to give any of it away. So I'll just say there's some crazy stuff.
Do you find it kind of so like it's a double-edged sword now with like oh we have all this time to watch shows but at the same time there's also too many shows to watch.
Yeah, I agree. There's way too many shows. I have to make a list of things to watch because otherwise I'm so overwhelmed by the amount of content there is. And there's a lot of really good content. It's not like there's a lot of crap. There's a lot of really
No.
good stuff.
It's amazing. It
Yeah.
is crazy. I'm finding out too there's like all these like streaming services, you know, there's like Amazon and Hulu and then I found out recently Gwen that NBC has one called
I
Peacock
know.
and it's just like crazy.
It's too much. And then you kind of, my husband and I cut the cord to our cable like 2 years ago and got just apps. And now I'm like, oh, well, with all these apps, it's going to be more expensive than it was when we just had regular cable.
See, I'm in Canada So hockey is like, we need it.
Yeah, we need
Like
it to
it's a
live.
sport. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And yeah, you know what we're saying. Mr. Dress Up Country.
Of course.
But no, I'm just saying, like, once they, because like that's why I still have cable because of sports, right? Because of hockey.
Right.
But
Right.
like once they get a proper, because there are streaming services for sports, but
Yeah.
they're not as reliable
Yeah.
as cable.
Well, yeah, and because you need to be able to watch sports in real time. You don't want to watch
Yes.
sports the next day because then it's done.
Yes.
Yeah.
So once they figure out like a really good streaming situation for sports,
Yeah.
I think cable is gonna be like in a lot of trouble,
Yeah. It's so crazy.
which is nuts. But no, but there's so many shows, so many things. I kind of interview like everyone. I interview people from pop culture, from sports, all over the place, which I think is pretty cool. But like I'm realizing like I interview a lot of people from these like reality shows, and I
Yeah.
find those are really interesting interviews because it's literally like they live a life and a camera's on top of them, where it's not like you, where you go in, you have a character, you play pretend essentially. You know what I mean? They're like supposed to live their lives, but then I'm realizing when I talk to them, there is a bit of like not scripted, but there is a little bit. You know what I mean?
They're very those. You know what it is? It's less that it's scripted and more that it's produced. Like they have story producers on those shows, so they're like, hey, so now we're gonna put you in this situation, and it would be great if you reacted kind of in this way. You know?
Yeah. Like I've interviewed people from a lot of the Bravo TV shows. So I've interviewed people from, Below Deck, Vanderpump Rules, Real Housewives of Dallas, $1 Million Listing, LA, those type ones. You know what I mean?
I don't watch a lot of reality TV, but I did just watch Love is Blind on Netflix. And I was just like, oh my God, because that's why I don't watch it, because it actually makes me, I think, as an actor, very uncomfortable, because I'm like, oh my God, this is so invasive.
But you know what would be a really cool reality show, and I'm sure it existed? They probably did it for like 4 or 5 episodes, and then it didn't get picked up. You know what I mean? Because I feel like ideas are not like ours anymore, Gwen. I feel like, yeah, like I feel like we can come up with something right now, and then it'll be kind of like a Simpsons did it. You know what I mean? Like what? But like an acting, like 4 or 5 actors like living together.
Yeah.
And then kind of the lives of like the auditions and all that. Like that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, they have done versions of that. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing is, at this point, I'm kind of like, I'd want to see a group of anybody, any kind of person. I'm like, I'd like to see it. But and the Real World essentially just did people, people living together.
I loved the Real World.
That was the first one. That was the first reality show, wasn't it?
Yeah, I love that show. I used to watch that with my parents.
Yeah, it's crazy that was the thing. And that was so innovative at the time. We're like, oh my gosh, what happens when people stop being polite and start being real?
I know, it is crazy.
Yeah.
It's a crazy life. It's a crazy world. Well, Gwen, thank you so much for joining me on Popternative.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I really had a good chat. I had a blast chatting with you, and now you'll have a chance to check out Mr. Dress Up.
I'm doing it right now. I'm gonna go get my husband and be like, so I hear of a Canadian Mr. Rogers type named Mr.
I'm gonna do the playback because you asked me about Mr. Rogers, and then when I said Mr. Rogers and Mr. Dress Up, the amount of intrigue in your face, you were like, what?
Very into this.
Absolutely. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up to date with everything?
On Instagram, I'm Gwenstagram811. On Twitter, I'm GwennyH811. And then on Facebook, I'm just Gwen Hollander.
Very cool. Well, congratulations with all the success so far with Kidding. Hope you're safe during this quarantine. And no, I had a blast chatting with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, this has been Popternative, youtube.com/Popternative for previous episodes. Until next time, this is Gwen Hollander from Kidding on Showtime and PD Beats signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to Popternative. Make sure to check out our past episodes of Popternative on YouTube. Be sure to like Popternative on Facebook and follow us on Twitter.
This has been an Autograph Communications production.